to understand what is meant by barriers to entry in a market, identify different types of barriers to entry in an industry, to analyze various government policies leading to regulation or deregulation of an industry, and to analyze various pricing strategies of firms from other firms' perspective.
Let us start over our discussion by understanding what is barriers to entry. A barrier to entry may be defined as a situation when a potential entrant firm is discouraged to enter and compete with an already established firm or the incumbent, and thus allowing the incumbent to make abnormal profits in the market. A barrier to entry is thus a tool by which imperfections in the market get created and competition gets reduced, that in turn leads to exploitation of consumers by the producers in terms of high price and lower output. This loss of welfare may, however, vary according to the degree of imperfection created, which in turn depends upon the nature and degree of the barrier created. The current lesson discusses meaning and various types of barriers to entry that exists in the industries today. The lesson is organized as follows. First section mentions various definitions of a barrier to entry as given by economists so far. The next discussion defines and provides examples on various types of barriers to entry, which is then followed by a discussion on relationship between free entry and social welfare. The concluding section outlines the summary of the lesson.
But the question that comes to our mind is that what is a barrier to entry? Let us look at definitions of barriers to entry. The literature on barriers to entry is vast and has various definitions provided by various authors. Let us study some of the definitions. Baines in 1956 on page 3 defines a barrier to entry as a barrier to entry is an advantage of the established sellers over the potential entrants, which is reflected in the extent to which established sellers can persistently raise their price above competitive levels without attracting new firms into the industry. Stigler, 1968, page 67, defines a barrier to entry as the cost that has to be borne at some or every rate of output by the firms seeking to enter the market, but was or is not to be borne by the firms already in the market. Gilbert in 1989 defined a barrier to entry as the rent that is derived from incumbency. Carlton and Perloff in 1994 gave two definitions of a barrier to entry as follows. A barrier to entry is anything that prevents an entrepreneur from creating a new firm in the market. A long-run barrier to entry is a cost necessarily incurred by an entrant that incumbents do not or have not had to bear. McAfee et al. In year 1994 gave a two-way classification of barriers to entry in terms of economic vis-à-vis antitrust barriers and primary versus ancillary barriers. They thus gave following definitions of entry barriers. An economic barrier is the cost that must be incurred by a new entrant and that incumbents do not have had to incur. An antitrust barrier is a cost that delays entry and thereby reduces social welfare relative to immediate but equally costly entry. Another definition given is a primary barrier to entry is the cost that constitutes the barrier to entry on its own. And another definition is an ancillary barrier is the cost that does not constitute a barrier to entry on its own but reinforces other barriers to entry if they are present. Thus, there is no consensus on the definition of a barrier to entry per se. However, one can still classify barriers to entry on the basis of their origin. For example, they could be natural or strategic. They could also be institutional or non-institutional. The barriers to entry on the basis of these classifications are discussed in our subsequent sections along with their examples. Let us now look at examples and classifications of barriers to entry. Barriers to entry have been classified as non-institutional barriers to entry, institutional barriers to entry, and third one is strategic barriers to entry. Let us study each one in detail. Starting with non-institutional barriers to entry, they are as follows: natural monopoly, product differentiation and product proliferation, absolute cost advantage, capital requirements. Let us understand each of them in detail. The first component under non-institutional barriers is natural monopoly. Natural monopoly may be defined as a situation when fixed costs of establishing a particular plant are so high that average costs keep falling as more and more output is produced. These falling average costs are also termed as the existence of economies of scale in production over a highly large range of output. These falling average costs and high fixed costs make it both necessary as well as desirable to have only one firm in the industry than having more firms. Thus, the mere nature of market restricts the entry of new firms in the market and hence enables the incumbent or already existing firms to enjoy supernormal profits over a long period of time. Such monopolies are generally found in the transmission of power industries in small countries like New Zealand. Cabral in 2000 has shown that the degree of economies of scale in an industry can be shown to be dependent upon the fixed costs to be incurred while entering that industry. Defining mu equal to AC upon MC as the coefficient of scale of production, it can be shown that for mu greater than 1, a firm experiences increasing returns to scale. Let total costs of a firm be denoted by capital C equal to capital F plus small c into small q, so that mu is equal to AC upon MC equals to small c plus capital F divided by small q whole divided by small c, which is equal to 1 plus capital F divided by small c into small q, where AC is average cost of production, MC is marginal cost of production, that equals small c for the firm considered above. Capital F is the fixed cost of production, capital C is the total cost of production, and small q is the output. Thus, equation 1 says that as capital F, which is fixed cost, increases, mu also increases. That is to say, increase in fixed costs leads to greater degree of scale economies of the industry. Let us move over our attention to returns to scale and the ratio between average cost and marginal cost. It is well known that in the long run, all inputs are variable inputs. Suppose a firm employs two inputs, labor and capital, in its production process and doubles the quantities of both. That is, scales up the inputs by a factor of 2. If the output of the firm also doubles, then this firm is characterized by constant returns to scale. If the output more than doubles, then it is a case of increasing returns to scale. While if output increases by less than a factor of 2, it is called decreasing returns to scale. Given the U-shaped average cost curve of a firm in the long run, we can find out the reasons of increasing, constant, and decreasing returns to scale. The reason where it is falling is considered to be the reason of increasing returns to scale. The reason where AC is constant is called the reason of constant returns to scale, while the reason where AC is increasing is said to be the reason of decreasing returns to scale. Recall from text that mu is equal to AC upon MC equals 1 when AC and MC are same. So, as the diagram below shows, all the values of output for which AC equals MC is the reason of constant returns to scale. On the other hand, if mu is greater than 1, then AC is greater than MC. This happens when AC is falling. Hence, mu greater than 1 implies increasing returns to scale. Similarly, it can be shown that for mu less than 1, a firm has decreasing returns to scale. Now let us discuss product differentiation and product proliferation. Incumbents sometimes create a niche for their product that in turn enables them to enjoy profit over the long run. In other instances, incumbents create a brand name for themselves and enjoy loyalty of consumers that is difficult for the new entrant to tamper with, and thus restricts its entry into the industry. In other instances, firms themselves introduce a lot of new products by the same brand so as to leave no room for a potential entrant to enter the industry and make any profits. This is especially true in items like shampoo and toothpastes. For example, in the industry for shampoos, L'Oreal's Paris has flooded the market with different kinds of shampoos by the same name and has made it difficult for other firms like IU to sell profitably. Next is absolute cost advantage. Certain firms are engaged in research and development efforts that enables them to develop newer and better techniques that are not known to the rivals and therefore make profits for them as opposed to their rivals. Sometimes established firms make contracts with the suppliers of their inputs, which prevents the entrants access to these inputs and thus restricts their entry into the industry. Last one is capital requirements. At times, new entrants thinking of entering an industry are denied entry in case they need public capital, either from financial institutions or public directly, by not getting that capital. This happens because their credibility is less known to the financiers as compared to that of already established firms. All the above cases of barriers to entry are those that are generally created by the incumbents or are natural. None of them is created by the government or other regulatory authorities of an economy. However, some of the barriers are also created by the institutions in an economy. Let us study those barriers in detail.
In a particular industry. To begin with, overproduction of certain goods like liquor, crackers, etc. may be harmful for a society and the environment, and therefore it is necessary to restrict their production and allow only those people to engage in their production who meet certain criteria. Secondly, a government may introduce import licenses, although for a limited period, so that domestic firms which are in their nascent stages may develop without any fear from their foreign counterparts. 4.2.2 Patents and copyrights. Patents and copyrights are the instruments through which a firm or an individual can prevent duplication of its or his product by another firm or an individual without his permission. These instruments are clearly created by the government so that the innovating firms or the individual gets enough return for its innovation and is encouraged to keep doing it further as well.
Strategic barriers to entry are those barriers that are artificially created by the actions of incumbents in order to prevent the entry of newcomers into a market. In such cases, the incumbent firm may use particular pricing strategies or even capacity expansion to pose threats to the potential entrants and therefore deter their entry. Let us understand this by considering a simple two-stage game in which first a potential entrant called challenger, denoted as C, decides whether to enter the market or stay out, and in the second stage the incumbent, denoted as M, which is a monopoly in the market, decides whether to accommodate the entrant or fight with it. If it decides to fight F with the entrant, then it will expand its output by lowering its price, called predatory pricing, and therefore prevent customers from purchasing from the entrant, while if it decides to accommodate A, it then may form a cartel with the entrant and may let it enter. The above situation can be represented in the form of a game tree as follows. Thus, in this case, given that challenger enters, fighting is a dominant strategy of the incumbent. So, he would choose to fight optimally. Given that incumbent is going to fight with him if he enters, the challenger would optimally choose to stay out of the market. Thus, the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, denoted as SPNE, of this game is challenger stays out and incumbent fights if challenger enters. Thus, in this case, the incumbent gives credible threat to the potential entrant and the entrant decides not to enter. A pair of strategies A and B is defined as Nash equilibrium if player A plays game A optimally given that player 2 plays game B and player 2 plays B optimally given that player 1 plays A. A strategy pair is said to be subgame perfect Nash equilibrium SPNE if it is Nash equilibrium in every subgame of the game. The firms may use instruments in order to give such credible threats. For example, the firm may spend money on advertising or heavy investments in research and development that adds to the sunk costs of business for both the incumbent as well as entrant.
Let us discuss the various ways of strategic barriers to entry. The first is predatory pricing, of which we have some of the examples. The US airline industry was deregulated in 1978, and that deregulation threatened the major airlines, for example, American, United, Delta, US Airways, Northwest, and Continental, with competition from the new discount airlines. As a result, these major airlines started to reduce prices and often match them with the prices charged by discount airlines in the areas where these airlines tried to enter. Following this practice, American drove the discount airlines out of business from its area Dallas hub in 1980s. The second example is of advertising. Advertising is another way of deterring the entry of newcomers into an already established market. The incumbents spend a lot of money on making a large section of people aware of their product and induce them to buy it. This poses a threat to the entrants on not being able to sell off their product, even if they enter. This in turn discourages them from entering the market. For example, Coca-Cola is one of those companies in the world beverages industry that spends a major proportion of its cost on advertising for its drink. It is because of its expenditure on advertising for its product that it captured a major share of Indian beverages industry over Indian domestic firms like Parle products, which produced brands like Thumbs Up and Limca. Finally, these firms were acquired by Coca-Cola and they don't exist anymore as independent firms. And the last example is the creation of excess capacity. Sometimes the incumbents create excess capacities in the markets in which a new firm planning to enter and is trying to compete with them. For example, following deregulation in 1978, when discount airlines tried to enter the airline industry, the major airlines like America and Delta started creating capacities in those areas which they had never been served before and forced the new discount airlines to go out of the industry.
Discuss barriers to entry and efficiency. Do barriers to entry always reduce social welfare? Are costs of entry always undesirable from the society's point of view? In other words, does free entry always enhance efficiency? In the current section, the relationship between barriers to entry and efficiency is elaborated upon. According to the first theorem of welfare economics, a perfectly competitive equilibrium is always efficient. In other words, if all the conditions of perfect competition are satisfied, then free entry into the industry will always lead to socially optimum outcome. However, if some of these conditions are violated, then one cannot guarantee that the theorem will hold true. For instance, consider an industry where there are n number of firms currently, each of whom is selling a homogeneous product and have identical cost function, where marginal cost is fixed and given by small c. Suppose a new firm, n plus 1th, enters the industry so that total output produced increases, but output per firm falls. In this case, it has been shown by Cabral 2000 that free entry will lead to excessive entry, which is socially inefficient. We can see in the figure that DD is market demand function, Small c is equal to small c is the marginal cost curve. Let initially equilibrium is set at price Pn, where output for firm is Qn, so that the total output produced by the industry is N into Qn, that is NQN. Now suppose one more firm enters the industry and assume that total output produced increases while output produced by each firm falls, which means n plus 1 into Qn plus 1 is greater than Nqn is greater than Nqn plus 1. Thus, after the entry of new firm, price falls to Pn plus 1, and as a result, the net change in welfare is given by the area D plus E. That is, after the new firm enters, there is a gain in social welfare by the area D plus E. Let the entry cost incurred by the firm is some amount capital F, and let us call this firm as M. Clearly, the new firm gets an increase in profit by the amount of Pn plus 1 minus C whole into Qn plus 1 equal to the area G plus D. Thus, if D plus E is less than F is less than G plus D, then it is beneficial for the new firm to enter the industry, but not for the society. This is a situation of business stealing effect, when some of the profits of the incumbent firm gets transferred to the entrant or is stolen by the entrant in terms of reduction in per firm output, but does not get transferred to the society, which makes it profitable for the entrant to enter but not for the society. In such a case, therefore, free entry will lead to excessive entry, which would be socially inefficient. In such cases, it would be more desirable to have some regulation in the industry by the government so as to prevent excessive entry.
Let us now therefore discuss another component, which is product differentiation and social welfare. If we consider a market that is characterized by a variety of products, for example, a new firm, when it introduces a different product in the market, then consumers may get the product that may not only be better in quality or other features, but it may also be cheaper. In that case, free entry may actually be desirable. In such case, free entry entails insufficient entry from a social point of view. Last example is of firm heterogeneity, dynamics of free entry, and social welfare. Finally, in the discussion on free entry and social welfare, it is always assumed that all the firms in the industry are homogeneous. However, in reality, firms are heterogeneous in nature. For example, firms differ in their sizes, their profitabilities, etc. In fact, it has been shown empirically that over time, less efficient and less profitable firms may leave the industry, and therefore the average productivity of the industry actually increases when its share transfers from less efficient firms to more efficient firms. Thus, from a dynamic analysis point of view, free entry may be desirable from a social point of view.
In this module, we have learned that A barrier to entry may be defined as a situation in which entry of newcomers is restricted for some reason and incumbents enjoy profits for a longer period of time. We have also learned that there may be different types of barriers to entry, like natural, institutional, or strategic barriers to entry. We also learned natural barriers to entry include barriers like natural monopolies, patents, licenses, and copyrights issued by the government. Natural monopoly is defined as a market structure when continuous economies of scale induce existence of a single firm in the market. Patents, copyrights, and licenses are also called institutional barriers to entry. Pricing strategies of firms like predatory pricing, expenditure on advertising and research, and development constitute strategic barriers to entry. Predatory pricing is a strategy under which incumbent firms cut prices of their product so as to make entry unprofitable for the entrants.